So Anthea, can you tell us a little bit about what the real alternative is and why it's so important that we do have a real alternative to this resting either with the courts or with the executive, this idea that a lot of land can just go for nil compensation as a route to addressing the problem. How can we really do land reform, and why is it important that we can really do land reform?
Well, I think we have to get away from the notion that it's the compensation that's been paid for land, the price that's been paid for land so far, that's been the real obstacle, either in rural areas where it's farming land that's an issue, or in urban areas where people are desperate for land for housing. That's where the real hunger is. So if we unpack that a bit more, in the rural areas, we do have a small proportion of people who very much want to farm. And David Rukasi is one of them, and he's being barred from getting on with it by everything that Terence was talking about, and particularly his lack of title. And this was something that the high-level panel highlighted too. They said that the beneficiaries, so-called, of land reform are being denied ownership because the government wants to keep all land which it acquires for land reform for itself. That means they can't access working capital, and that's the first requirement that you need for success in farming, among a whole lot of others as well, ranging from electricity and labor to infrastructure and markets and so on, and the capacity to withstand drought and crime and any number of other obstacles. So it is possible to do land reform probably properly, but the key thing is to recognize that the real need is to expand the number of commercial farmers. How many hectares you transfer only to see those hectares fall out of production is not the way to go. It's not the key concern. The key concern is how to expand the number of commercial farmers. For that you need, first of all, title. You need money to make available, and the Agri-SA and other farming organizations have come up with a whole number of practical ideas about how you can put together a sort of blended finance model where you get partly money from the state, partly money from private sector. We've suggested that you could have land reform bonds that many people would actually be glad to invest in if it would help a sensible process of expanding the number of commercial farmers. But you must also make sure they have the right skills, which means, again, you need the existing commercial farmers to help them. And you need the infrastructure, the markets, and partly that depends on government. But increasingly, it means that where you need, for example, a road or a dam, that it should be built on a public-private partnership, because trusting the state to do with its administrative inefficiency is just a recipe for long delay and over endlessly rising costs, as we've seen with Eskom. So what we've said in the rural areas is that you need basically an Ipolazi proposal to try and make it easier for farmers to farm. And in the urban areas, what you need is to make it easier for people to gain access to housing. And the private sector used to build quite a lot of low-cost housing. They've stopped doing it because they can't get access to serviced land. Getting the land is only the part of the problem. After that, you've got to get the state to provide the services and the approvals and the permits. And what should be quite a quick process will take anything between 3 and 10 years. So again, it's not the compensation that you have to pay for land or the price that you have to pay for it that's the issue. It's enormous administrative incompetence, the slow process on the part of the state to build the houses that are required, very often corruption in the housing contracts that are handed out, so that what is built in the end is so badly built that in some instances you just have to start again, or you have to spend a great deal on repairing what should have been done properly in the first place. And the houses are tiny, they're built on the urban periphery. It's just been the wrong model in every way. And again, you could empower people in a real way by giving them housing vouchers, by taking some of the budget that's being so poorly spent on housing and giving vouchers for housing only to people below a certain income. And then they could decide how they want to use those vouchers, whether they want to borrow from the banks, perhaps using that to top up what they can borrow in any event, whether they're living in an informal settlement and they can now start upgrading their own home rather than having to wait for the government to do it. And if the private sector was aware that those housing vouchers are in place and that there's now a much bigger housing market, And again, if they could partner with the government on all the administrative bottlenecks which hold up the process, then you could have a pipeline of flats and other housing coming into the market, which many people would be empowered to buy, or they could start setting up, as particularly in the informal settlements, their own structures on a much more sophisticated and satisfactory basis than is now possible.